Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 5 cards from Knights of the Frozen Throne that have been the most surprising to me. And when I say surprising, I mean specifically cards that have pleasantly surprised me. These are cards that have exceeded my expectations, that maybe I underestimated, but have actually carved out spots in the meta so far and look like playable cards. Now, not necessarily tier 1 cards all of the time, but just different than I expected in a positive direction. So let's go ahead and jump into this list of surprising cards. Up first is Prince Keleseth, one of the 3 princes, and of course all of the princes got a ton of hate when they were first revealed. I think most people did properly recognize that Prince Keleseth was the most promising of all the princes, but that certainly didn't excuse him from the mockery and the hate. Prince Keleseth still got plenty of that. I think I used language like, I wouldn't be totally surprised if Prince Keleseth saw some sort of play, but it'd be really hard to make him work. But surprisingly, Prince Keleseth has actually found his way into a couple different classes and a couple different archetypes, most namely with Zoo Warlock, I think, which clearly not a tier 1 deck in the Frozen Throne meta, but has still seen some play, showed up. And Prince Keleseth works in that environment when you have enough 1-drops to help support it. I've also seen him show up in some Paladin lists, including a deck I made, where he really seemed to work quite well. So Prince Keleseth, actually even in a deck that is more early game oriented, just because he gives you so much value every time you draw a new minion. If you have a minion based deck to support that, it turns out there are ways in certain classes that aren't hyper reliant on their 2-mana cards to actually make Prince Keleseth successful. The other 2 princes haven't seen nearly as much play as Keleseth. I have seen them pop up from time to time, but it feels like one of those things where they're sort of forced into the deck instead of actually being a good fit. So really the only prince that has exceeded expectations in my mind, but has actually exceeded them fairly well. So up next is the Scalemancer. This is a card I never expected to see any sort of play. I thought having to play a 2/2 for 5 mana was just far too penalizing, and that the upside of rolling into that 8/8 skeleton when this worked just wouldn't be high enough, because I didn't think it would work nearly often enough, because I assumed that your opponent would never really have to trade into a 2/2. But there's a couple cards in particular that have really enabled Scalemancer. For Paladin, there's the Old Faithful Spike-Ridged Steed. So when you put that on a Scalemancer, your opponent suddenly has to trade into it, and then they feel really, really bad when they do so. But beyond that, actually another Frozen Throne card in Bone Mare has made Scalemancer good, because that's another neutral card that gives any class that wants to run that 2-card combo a way to force some action through Scalemancer. So in minion-based decks that are a little more pressure-oriented, or even some mid-range decks that are looking to add an additional body into their arsenal, Scalemancer plus Bone Mare becomes a fit that works, and there have been a few different decks actually utilize that combination. The fact that it has Death Rattle synergies is a little bit of a bonus, and the fact that it's sort of immunity against area of effect spells, because suddenly it punishes area of effects, have given Scalemancer a little home and some space to play with in the constructed format, which is totally stunning to me. I'm super happy to see it, but far exceeded any hopes and dreams I ever had for this card. I thought it would be an instant throwaway, but instead it's actually popping up from time to time in real play. Up next in the number 3 spot is Shadow Essence for Priest, the 6-mana spell that allows you to summon a 5/5 copy of a random minion in your deck. This is one that I thought would just be far too situational and specific in its use to ever really make sense. It's the sort of thing that Barnes already did better. Now, I think I did say things like this card could be played, but ultimately I never really expected it to, and I don't think many other people did either. Nobody anticipated just how viable what I thought would have been a gimmicky deck like Big Priest actually became a really competitive, near top-tier deck. Big Priest is playable, it's strong on the ladder because of Shadow Essence and Barnes and Eternal Servitude, and all of those pieces actually work so well together that it can support a deck, and Shadow Essence is a vital piece of that. When you can run things like the Lich King and Ysera and the new Obsidian statues, all of that combined gives you enough really powerful cards to summon from Shadow Essence that it actually makes sense, and I didn't foresee that. There's a lot of great cards that came out of Frozen Throne, that, like Obsidian Statue and Lich King, for instance, that made that hard to predict, but Big Priest is here. It seems to actually be a real deck, not just a gimmick, and Shadow Essence is always going to be a part of Big Priest as long as Big Priest is a thing. Up next is the neutral card, Tainted Zealot. This is another one of those cards where I said it looks fine, but it probably just won't be strong enough to make the cut in an actual constructed deck. But that hasn't been the case. Tainted Zealot is actually showing up on the ranked ladder, most namely in Warlock, thanks to the really powerful interaction that Tainted Zealot has, in particular with the card Defile. Most other cheap spell damage minions, think, for instance, Blood Mage Thalnos, they die whenever you cast Defile, because it kills them immediately. But when you have Divine Shield attached to spell damage, that becomes a very powerful interaction, where you can cast that first Defile for 2 damage to the board. You're presumably going to kill something, another one's going to go off, and it will also have the spell damage instead of killing the spell damage minion, killing the Thalnos, and just doing 1 next time. So it becomes a 4 mana AoE spell, or excuse me, a 4 damage AoE spell alongside a Tainted Zealot instead of just a 3 damage or even 2 damage AoE spell like you might expect otherwise, making Tainted Zealot plus Defile a good fit for Warlock. So this card actually did, because of that specific interaction, find some play. I've also just seen other people tossing it in because it is a sticky minion and spell damage can be valuable. You can really start to take advantage of that spell damage that's staying on the board, whereas with other cards out there that do the spell damage, they typically die a lot faster and aren't quite as resilient. So Tainted Zealot, card that I thought looked fine, would just ultimately be too niche, but in the end actually ended up working rather well. And then finally, the 5th card that was the most surprising to me from Knights of the Frozen Throne is Bone Mare. Now let me say real quickly, let me walk you through this on why it was surprising. I thought Bone Mare was going to be a fine card. I just didn't think it would have nearly the success rate it has had in constructed format. I said things like it's going to be the best arena card of all time. So I recognize just how powerful the potential of this card was, but I did not think that potential would extrapolate quite so powerfully to constructed format like it has. But Bone Mare is, I think, right now the #2 most played Knights of the Frozen Throne card. So that means it's being played way more than I expected. I thought it might show up occasionally as a sort of finisher card in a mid-range deck. That is where it's showing up, but it's being used by so many different classes because a +4/+4 that gives a minion taunt, as it turns out, is very, very powerful indeed, even in constructed. So yeah, Bone Mare may not be surprising to everybody out there. A lot of people did identify just how strong this effect could be, but I'm not sure anyone really adequately or accurately predicted just how much we were going to be seeing this thing in constructed, because it is sort of the primordial Drake of this expansion, where it's that one neutral card that's a pretty high cost that is showing up in so many different decks. Almost everybody can find a home for Bone Mare in some way or another. So not the most surprising perhaps, but certainly surprising and the most played and one of the most talked about and one of the most important and influential cards from the entire expansion, which I never thought Bone Mare would be. And there you have it, guys. That's my list. Those are the 5 cards that were the most surprising to me as for how much they've been played in the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta. I really never thought we'd see any of these in constructed, and although some of them might be losing steam already, like Tainted Zealot and Skelemancer, I think they're sort of dwindling down in their popularity already. I'm still glad that somebody found a place for these decks and put them in a competitive environment and showed you that even, neutral cards like those that don't look all that strong on the surface, that maybe we underestimated them, and there's potential in those cards and in the right sorts of environments, in the right kinds of metas, in synergy with other cards as well. They can do something good and be powerful and be good cards. And for anybody out there who's working on a budget or maybe doesn't have all the perfect deck lists, these are the kinds of cards that can inspire you and can fill in gaps in your collection so that you can still build competitive decks, maybe not with the absolute top tier card, but with something close and that's something that gets the job done. So all that said, guys, if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, if you have any cards that surprised you that you think are worth mentioning, of course, leave those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.